I can't remember a federal leader ever doing this during a campaign, musing about not just a minority, but a coalition.
If the Conservatives win more seats, will you still try to form a coalition government with the Liberals?
Oh, absolutely, because we're not going to support a Conservative government. We're going to fight a Conservative government. We're going to fight it all the way. So we're ready to do whatever it takes.
Jagmeet Singh, well, he walked it back a little bit the next day, but everyone's been talking about it ever since, because if it's a Liberal or Conservative minority, they'll need friends to stay in power. The most likely bedfellows for the Liberals are the NDP or Greens. Justin Trudeau, well, he wouldn't rule out a coalition, but...
Can you clarify, yes, like straight up yes or no answer, would you be willing to form a coalition government?
My focus is on electing a progressive government and stopping Conservative cuts.
The message he wanted out, vote for a progressive government, not a progressive opposition. The Conservatives, meanwhile, are spinning this message, buying ads to push on Facebook that a vote for Trudeau is a vote for a coalition you can't afford. That idea got played up by pundits and prominent Conservatives across the country. And then on Thursday, Scheer planted another big flag, calling a news conference to say if Trudeau tries to stay in power with a coalition, that would be illegitimate.
It is clear that in modern Canadian history, the party with the most seats forms the government, and that a prime minister who comes out of an election with fewer seats than another party resigns. That is the convention in modern Canadian history.
It may be the tradition, but that's not exactly how it works. The Constitution says whoever wins the confidence of the House, with or without the help of other parties, can form government. And Trudeau, as the last Prime Minister, gets the first shot. Look what happened in BC in 2017.
So, thank you. I guess I'll never see any of you ever again.
Not so much. Christy Clark's Liberals, well, they did win the most seats, but they didn't have a majority. And so then the NDP formed a coalition with the Greens and took over a few months later. And a coalition almost brought down Stephen Harper's minority government back in 2008. Stéphane Dion and Jack Layton proposed one, but their deal included the Bloc leader, Gilles Duceppe.
Mr. Speaker, this deal that the leader of the Liberal Party has made with the separatists is a betrayal of the voters of this country, a betrayal of the best interests of our economy, a betrayal of the best interests of our country, and we will fight it with every means.
Harper eventually won that fight, persuading the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament, and he stayed in power for another 2 years. But this time, could Scheer be the one to cut deals with the Bloc? Scheer says he's only interested in a majority. But until Singh got everyone talking publicly about that coalition, that's what party leaders always said. But then, as Pierre Trudeau revealed in his memoir, chats about possible deals in the back rooms are actually pretty common. Even he had a secret meeting with Ed Broadbent about a coalition in 1980. Joining me now to talk about all of this is our Canada Votes After Show panel. They'll be joining us again tomorrow night on CBC Television and CBC News Network as part of our comprehensive election coverage. So here they are. James Moore, he was a cabinet minister under Stephen Harper. He's in Vancouver. Martha Hall-Findlay, president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation and former Liberal MP. She's in Calgary. And leader of the Manitoba NDP, formerly of CBC, Wab Kinew. He's in Winnipeg. Hi, all. Hello.
Hello.
Wab, you're with the NDP, obviously. It seems, I want to get your analysis of the Singh spin here. It seems like he's saying, you can vote for me, and I still won't let Scheer be. Either way, I won't let Scheer be Prime Minister. What's your take on the message he's trying to send?
But I think what Mr. Singh is doing is inserting himself into that conversation and saying, listen, we could have a minority government, and you can vote for me and for my candidates, and you'd still be able to be confident that you're voting your conscience while also stopping the Conservatives from forming government.
The message behind the Scheer tactic this week of saying, I'm going for a majority, I've got to win the whole thing. It really seems like he's making this idea of a coalition. He's not so much talking about Justin Trudeau as the villain anymore. It's about this coalition idea as the villain. How do you see that?
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy, apparently. You know, everybody's in front of you. I agree, actually, with Wab, you know, that Jagmeet Singh is right to sort of notice that through the course of this campaign, that Justin Trudeau's personal popularity numbers are flat and actually going down. He has 2-to-1 net negatives, certainly from those who never voted Liberal, they're never going to go Liberal, and that he's an extraordinarily polarizing person. But I think through the campaign, even though Justin Trudeau has put sort of new progressive issues on the table that he was hoping would take flight, like an assault weapons ban and gun control, and getting even more support from Barack Obama and other things, that even with all that his numbers have stayed flat and progressive voters are not going back. So therefore, for Jagmeet Singh to say openly that he would work in a coalition and that the public shouldn't be scared of a coalition, I think is probably very wise. I think he's making a strategic mistake, however, to rule out working with Conservatives. In 2006, when Stephen Harper formed government with Jack Layton in the opposition, Conservatives and New Democrats worked very well together in passing the Federal Accountability Act and other measures that I think strengthened Canada's confidence in our democratic institutions.
Which is why it's so frustrating to hear people already saying, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to participate. It's far, far better to see what happens and then vote by vote, issue by issue. As James said earlier, there are for sure some issues where there could easily be constructive work together that shouldn't be partisan. So, you know, we need a country to be run. Often you get the sense people talk about, well, if you're in opposition, your job is to oppose. Actually, no. You're elected as members of parliament. Your job is to help govern the country. And my hope is that we'll see a bit of that after the tempers of the election campaign give way to the need to govern.
Well, Bob, we're hearing a lot about how previous minority governments who have made friends with the NDP, it's led to all of these things like the CPP and so on.
Everything great in Canada happened under a minority government. We've been hearing that a lot this week. Pensions, healthcare, all sorts of advancements, in terms of legislation in the last decade. I do think that there is some good opportunities. I do think that there's a lot of people who are excited about maybe being able to put some of the more progressive ideas around pharmacare and dental care forward, about being able to get some more action on solving the climate crisis. I think that excites a lot of young voters in particular. But if we could just back up to the fact that Mr. Scheer is talking a lot about the coalition this past week, I don't think that that's by accident. You know, I think that a lot of this talk of minority, and in particular of a potential coalition, does benefit Mr. Scheer. I think that there still is the memory for a lot of voters of the coalition with Dion and the Bloc,
the one that didn't happen,
more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
Never happened, but it was very polarizing at the time. And I think that Mr. Scheer is sort of counting on him bringing that up a little bit as a scare tactic and potentially sending a message to voters who are still deciding this final weekend that perhaps they should support him. What I think the job of the other leaders, and Mr. Singh in particular, is to drive the message home that this is potentially an opportunity to move forward the progressive ideas that you have for Canada and the vision that you have for this country.
From the beginning, it's appeared that the Conservatives and the Liberals are so close that it could be a very tight race. What does it mean if it ends up being a minority government in terms of the East-West divide, in terms of tensions in this country?
Leaders have their own personal regional identity and basis of support, and the number one project of any prime minister at all times is national unity. And I think that we have a real tension right now. The Bloc Québécois could come back to Parliament right now with between 30 and 40 seats in Parliament, driving wedges that in the long term are designed to destroy Canada. You have Alberta, certainly in particular, and lots of big parts of Western Canada, canola farmers and others, who feel like not only are their issues not being addressed, but their issues aren't even being talked about. And they're going to vote overwhelmingly likely for the Conservative Party, and it's likely that the next Parliament, if it's an alignment of parties that have no base of support and no aspirations to grow their parties in those regions of the country, that their issues are going to get further ignored, then that's a real strain and a problem on national unity, and we need to find a way to deal with it.
And there's no question there's some really big issues in terms of infrastructure, pipelines, support for, or lack thereof, of the oil and gas industry, which is a huge industry out here, but it's also a huge industry for the country as a whole. No question there's significant frustration. What we keep trying to remind people is these are deeper challenges that face the region, that face industries like that, It's not going to be solved or made hugely worse tomorrow night.
You're nodding your head there, Rob.
Well, yeah. We have canola producers, soy producers, pork producers in the prairies who are essentially collateral damage in this trade dispute with China, and we have barely even discussed China in this campaign. So there are huge issues lurking that are going to confront the next prime minister that we haven't touched on, and perhaps national unity will be one of them. But again, I do think that perhaps that means that a minority government is the best outcome that we could hope for in this election, because whoever becomes the prime minister after Monday's vote, they will have to look for support from different parties if it is a minority scenario. And in so doing, my hope is that they will have to piece together a group to survive confidence votes and confidence motions that would represent all parts of the country.
One thing I certainly think is true of this campaign, I think has been a common assessment, is that people have said that this has been a pretty miserable campaign, pretty ugly campaign, pretty just not a great campaign on a lot of scores. So I think then, therefore, building on Martha's last point, that any politician who goes into the next parliament without sort of an appetite to sit down with others and deal responsibly with big public policy questions and park the partisan nonsense. And if you put Canadians back into another campaign as miserable as this one, with the aftertaste still in our mouths of this one, I don't think voters will look too kindly upon those groups of politicians.
Who are you referring to as the partisan nonsense, James?
Well, I suspect that. Well, I think it's eye of the beholder. So, but look, no, but I think certainly some of the rhetoric has been a little bit overstated and a little bit hot, and it's unfortunate when that happens.
Thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and we will see you all tomorrow night.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.